Welcome to this episode of Parresia, the American Freedom Alliance podcast. And I am Dr. Karen Siegemund, president of the American Freedom Alliance and host of Parresia. I'm delighted to be here with my great friend, Peter McIlvenna, who has been chief of staff for Lord Pearson in the House of Lords. He was campaign manager for several months for Nigel Farage's UKIP party. He is the host of Hearts of Oak podcast. Brilliant show. He's a frequent guest on Bannon's War Room, and he also spoke at one of our American Freedom Alliance conferences last year, World War III. And as soon as we pick up our conferences again, we would love to have you back. Now you're on the board of the American Freedom Alliance, which makes me absolutely thrilled. Peter, delighted to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you. You've covered everything. I think I can now sit back and just pass over to you, Karen.
You're done?
I'm done.
So, well, not that easy. So, you started Hearts of Oak in 2020. It seems to me it was right before the world shut down. You were going to do live events, and then it turned into a podcast. And its focus is about free speech, as I understand it, and being a proponent of it in a way that few are in the UK. What was it that triggered your wanting to create such a platform?
It was really with being with UKIP for, 5 years, which was Nigel Farage's party, the party that got Brexit, freedom from the tyranny of the EU. And I've been there for 5 years. I've been chairman of my local branch for 3.5 years, senior researcher in City Hall, which is the London Assembly, been there for a good 2.5 years to the UKIP group, and then 6 months as national campaign manager for our local elections and the European parliamentary elections in 2019. And then kind of what do you do whenever a party achieves its aim? I don't really know if there is a party in the world that has a single aim that achieves it, and then it's like a charity. A charity doesn't want to solve the problem. A charity wants to talk about the issue, raise money, and do good in that issue. But God forbid the problem would go away, because then the charity would be defunct. And it's the same for this political party, for UKIP, the party that delivered Brexit. And when Brexit was delivered in some shape or form, not really delivered, because Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister at the time, didn't have a clue what to do with it. That's a kind of separate part. Whenever a leader, whenever a prime minister of a country gets power and doesn't know what to do with that power, that is a dangerous situation, and there's a vacuum. And that's what we found in back in 2019, when Boris Johnson, who was the great hope, the great pretender, the person that we thought would actually fix the problems in the UK, and didn't know what to do with that power. So in the midst of that, in the middle of this political chaos, a number of us came together who'd kind of been involved in UKIP and thought we need to start something. So let's start an organisation that has town hall events, that engages with the public. There's educational events across the country, and we can help the public understand what is happening and how they can be involved. So we started this 20th of February 2020. We had these events planned: a mass lobby of Parliament, an educational event, and we were going to roll that out over the year. Little did we know that 2 weeks later you couldn't leave your front door because of a so-called pandemic that was going to kill us all. So it was St. Patrick's Day, I think, in March, and we had a mass lobby of Parliament planned for the grooming gangs, the Muslim Pakistani mass rape gangs that have affected between 250,000 and 1 million girls. That's another issue that have gone on for 60 years. And as a warning to the US, if you let Islam come in, then it will bring its ideology, its belief system, its value system, and overwhelm any American dream. And the American dream will be the American dream of Pakistan and no longer the US. But back to my story. So we started this. You couldn't leave your front door 2 weeks later. So we thought, what do we do? What a stupid time to launch an organization. But we didn't know a worldwide pandemic was happening. So what do you do? So we thought, well, Alan and myself, who co-founded it, Alan Craig, a good friend from my UKIP days and many other things, and our Islam Roadshow amongst churches that we did together, we thought, well, let's do interviews. This thing called podcasts. What is that? What is that about? You can talk to people online. The marvel of technology, what we are doing today. And we thought, well, let's start that. So we started doing interviews with friends, contacts that we knew, and then have widened that. So 5 years later, we've done probably about to hit 800 interviews with about 285, 290 individuals, and I've met the most phenomenal people. And you, Karen, are one of those who I met 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, can't remember when it was, over in LA, and I had the privilege of being at one of your events there in, I think it was June 2022. And it's been a phenomenal journey, connect with people, like-minded people, discussing freedom of speech, how that fits into all our contexts in different nations in the West. We're all united really by a understanding that conversation, that speech, that the freedom to engage with ideas is vital for our a society to flourish, and yet we're seeing huge curtailment across the board. The bright spots are President Trump in the US and the populist parties that are rising across Europe. And just to take us right to the present day, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, have just pulled the top party in Germany for the first time. They've gone up from 21 to 25%, and they're the most popular party in Germany. And that will send shockwaves through the European Union. And I reckon after they labelled AfD a terrorist organisation, I reckon the next step will be to make them illegal, which we've seen with Le Pen in France, we've seen in Romania, we've seen with the FPO in Austria being refused to allow to form a government. And that's what we're seeing. Democracy is good as long as you vote our way. If you vote a different way, then you'll be banned. So that's where we are today at the moment.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up AfD and all the populist movements, and I want to talk about them also. But before we move away from Hearts of Oak, what was the impetus for the name? Because it's a fascinating name.
It's coming up with a name is a nightmare, and no one should ever be in a committee coming up with a name because it's so frustrating. And we came together, had a couple of conversations on all different names, and the behind Hearts of Oak was we wanted passion and stability. We wanted to engage with the issues. The oak is a traditional symbol of Englishness, the oak tree. And we wanted, well, how do you connect that stability, those roots in your culture and society, along with a passion and drive to do something? Because we can see some of the discussion about heritage and about roots and about history being very staid and not very emotional. And that's the concern. And we discussed how do we bring energy and excitement and emotion and passion to this. And that's where the term Hearts of Oak came about. And yeah, that's what's the name that's been with us for 5 years. And I think it's the same for any country. Whatever the symbol is of a nation, you want to also have the passion, energy, and enthusiasm with that, or else it becomes a historical relic that has no impact to today.
And you tie those together, free speech, with your national identity and a passion for preserving it, and that seems to me what you've been doing. You also, more than maybe anybody, reach across the pond to our side. And you do this mindfully because we we have a similar passion for free speech. It's also encoded in our Constitution, or protected by our Constitution. We have this First Amendment right to free speech granted to us by our Creator, but protected by the Constitution. You have no such protection. So are you warning us? Are you coveting what we have? Or are you trying to model passionate voices in defense of free speech on what we do? Or are you telling us to be careful and don't lose it?
Your First Amendment is precious. Your Second Amendment is also precious, and I wish we had that. There was a meme I saw one time of what to do in Britain when your house is broken into and your only defensive weapons are in the dishwasher. Literally, that is where we are. You can take someone on with a fork or a spoon or maybe a blunt knife, because it seems to be illegal to sell sharp knives in the UK unless you can prove your identity. Um, so this into all of that, it's that reaching over, and in the I think some of it comes from that connection that the UK have had with the US, and the UK obviously are the junior partner of that. And despite the fact you guys got annoyed over the tax on tea, we've kind of got over that issue. And now no one's revolting over like a 40% tax rate that you have. But that to the side, it's this, we we kind of come from the same position of wanting freedom to flourish and wanting independence to rise up, wanting the individual to actually build something and that to connect with society. And the UK have always been called a nation of small businesses or of small shopkeepers. And it is that small business that drives, and it is exactly the same for the US. Small businesses drive the US economy. And it is that thinking that as an individual, you can achieve something, you can build something, you can make something. And by doing that, you contribute not only to your community, not only to your family, but you contribute to society as a whole. Exactly the same fits with the US. So we've got a strong connection and a strong belief in free speech and an ethos, a foundation that's built on biblical principles. Those are very wide, but that comes from the original founders of the US, where they put God at the center and wanted the freedoms, the beliefs that the Bible talks about to be actually the basis of your society. And we have been exactly the same. We have moved away from those much quicker than you have. But I think for Hearts of Oak, it's about that transatlantic connection, the values we share. And it also comes from, I think, a frustration with what is happening in the UK. And the US looks sexier. The US looks more interesting. And there's so much happening over stateside that is not happening in the UK. We had a Conservative Party for 14 years, a Conservative in name only, Chino, and that has destroyed our nation in terms of opening the doors to mass immigration with Islam, with ideologies, with the LGBT agenda, with the destruction of family, with the demise of the church, etc., etc., etc. And we have seen the UK change massively in the last 20 years, and during the last 15 years is a so-called Conservative government that kept changing the leaders. So we kind of think, well, where can we look to for hope? And hope seems to come across the pond. It seems to come from the US. It hasn't come from Europe. But now we are in an interesting position where that hope is coming from both sides. And I think that's going to produce something really interesting in the UK. We are four plus years away from a general election. Nothing much can happen in that time. And we have a socialist government that got a massive majority. But what is happening with President Trump, who is a conviction politician, not a consensus politician, what is happening across Europe is going to, I think, produce something phenomenal. And that's why I'm excited that President Trump taking the White House now instead of 4 years ago actually means the path, the connection, that bridge is open to Europe that wasn't open 4 years ago. And I think the conversations they're going to have, the relationship that is possible, is so much more exciting, and so much more beneficial than would have been if it was 4 years ago. So I think, despite the fact that you guys had to go through Sleepy Joe, or Obama, or whoever it was that was actually running that, because I can't imagine it was Sleepy Joe in his diapers, then actually we are now in a better situation for you guys going through that. And I think you've woken up, we've all woken up to the woke agenda, and a shock and awe tactics are being used today.
It's such an odd thing to say that thank goodness they stole the election 4 years ago. But I think we've all we're all walking around saying exactly that. I mean, thank goodness. Calling him Sleepy Joe, or whoever it was, it was an excruciatingly painful time. There's We look back on it with real horror, and on a daily basis it was a horrifying thing. And another four, it would have been dead. So, but those 4 years, we did more people woke up in the United States, of course. But a lot of what Europe went through, as you point out, during those 4 years kind of had to be gone through. And we saw the huge, the tectonic shift in the European parliamentary elections. Was it just a year ago, where all of the populist parties, AFD, as you mentioned, FPÖ, Le Pen, everywhere rose in this incredibly dramatic way, only to be shut down and shunted off to the side. But while that was painful to watch, it was part of the growing process, it seems, of these populist parties. And now it seems more people have awakened to the desperation of the various left-wing parties to shut them down and shut them out. FPÖ, you and I talk about, our great friend Elizabeth, connected to the Freedom Party of Austria, came in number one and is not allowed to be part of the coalition. Le Pen, number one, convicted and being banned from running. AFD, number one, and being shut out, and possibly even made an illegal party. Do you think all of that is the resistance getting to be something, the resistance of AFD, FPÖ, Le Pen, or whoever will be in the French Rassemblement National? Are they Do they have time to regroup? Are they learning what they're up against? Is this in the end going to be a good thing, or are they feeling demoralized? And of course, in England with Starmer, who's just breathtakingly awful. Um, but you're all facing the same thing. You're facing immigration. You're facing is Islam taking over everything. You're facing energy crises and food crises, and obviously free speech crises. Are these parties taking the time to be strengthened, or are they feeling demoralized?
I think they're they're being strengthened, and I love that you used the word stolen. 100% agree, and I love that you used the word Islam and not Islamism. So, kind of, I like you even more. So yes, but no, I think we are seeing when Viktor Orban, the Hungarian president, put together the Patriots for Europe grouping, which immediately became the third largest grouping in the European Parliament. And things work by those groupings, not by individual parties, but by the groupings. And that's a phenomenal achievement to start a group and be number three immediately, with Chega from Spain, with Vox from Portugal, if I've got those two the right way round, coming second and third. But then you've got, and the one that we've missed out is Giorgia Meloni in Italy. And of course, Salvini gets some of the headlines, and he's done phenomenal work. Giorgia Meloni came in, and Steve Bannon part of the movement, and Georgia was the great hope. That didn't happen. But now with President Trump in, and this is who it all boils, or this is who it all circles around, President Trump, because he seems to have given Maloney the backbone to actually stand up. And she realized, if I it depends how you look at it. If you look at it one way, giving her the benefit of the doubt, then she obviously had a lot to go up against. She had all the unions in Italy, which is massively unionized, and she had a lot of the media entities. She felt maybe she couldn't win outright against them, so it was a softly approach. That's giving her the benefit of the doubt, and now she feels she can go in strongly. But she feels she can go in strongly because President Trump now gives her that backing. So you've got Maloney in Italy, you've got Orban, who's been a ever-present figure, really, in Hungary. And Hungary has been the linchpin. I mean, it's the only country with CPAC in Europe. CPAC Hungary. No other country has managed to actually have that, and it's coming up for, I think, the fourth year running. So Hungary had been a bright light in Europe for freedom, for national identity, for the family values, and pushing back against the woke ideology that seeks to destroy all of that. And I think Maloney is stepping into that. And then, of course, you've got the Swedish Democrats as part of the government up in Sweden. You've got the Danes actually pushing ahead. You've got the FPO in a very strong position. And the AFD, it seems to be, and you talked about, are they demoralised or strengthened? Well, it seems to be the FD are strengthened, because whatever the government do, and they went up from 10 to 20% in the last election, they doubled. They weren't allowed to be part of the government. So what happens? Their popularity keeps rising, and the public are not stupid. And all the issues I have with democracy, that I would prefer a benevolent dictator any day, but we've got democracy, and it shows that when the system pushes back against a hugely successful party like the AfD, then it draws more people to it. It doesn't do the opposite. And what the governments have tried to snuff out, I think they've given rise and popular support to. And with AfD going up from 21 to 25% now, overtaking the governing party, which are 24%, people see through the lies of the media. They see through the lies of the institutions. They see through the lies of the European Union, and they want something different. And I think that will continue to happen. Not only have you got Orban's party, the Patriots of Europe, but you've also got the AfD heading up their party, which is, I think it's the 8th or ninth. It's the smallest party, but yet those are two populist groupings within the European Parliament, and then you've got the quasi groupings on the right, the EPC or EPPC. I never know what they are, because they don't know what they stand for, but they've traditionally been the party on the right, and they're trying to find their way. So I think there are a lot of changes, and it is positive. And I think if we had this conversation maybe 6-8 months ago, if we had this conversation prior to your election in November, it would have been a more concerning conversation. But now, with that, the light that we see in the US, and I know President Trump is not the Messiah, but he is the actually hope for restoring the American dream, and that connects with Europe. So we are in a much better situation. And I think, to answer your question, the parties, the population across Europe are not demoralized, despite the huge restrictions on freedom of speech that we face across Europe, with the Digital Services Act in the European Parliament and the Online Safety Bill in the UK that restricts anything that may cause offence. Despite that, we see these populist parties rise and rise. And with the rise of alternative media also in Europe, I think we are in a positive place, much more than they were prior to November.
It is an astounding thing, that the Trump effect, both for ill, people are terrified, and, but also for good. And we saw this 8 years ago. Even though Boris Johnson came up before Trump did, and we were all very hopeful for him, and then he just was a complete, very weak, ineffectual, and a huge disappointment. The Trump effect is gigantic, and just he is not the Messiah. We agree, but he does carry this beacon of hope and sort of follow me. At the same time, though, when we saw Le Pen convicted and then shut out as a potential candidate, even though because she is the leading candidate, it's a horrifying thing to see that in Europe that can be done, where here they tried to sideline Trump, he's a convicted felon, you can't vote for him, and they tried through, I guess, the 14th Amendment or some amendment in the Constitution. It wasn't the 14th. I don't remember what it was. Shutting him out from candidacy, but it didn't fly. In France, it's absolutely flying. They banned her from running. AFD, they're trying to ban the party, as we said. So you have more levers of power, I guess, that are being used. Is that in part because they're afraid of the Trump effect? Or is there any connection at all? Or is it just their own, we can't let this happen?
Well, you're in a different position because you've got a two-party system and no one else is really in there. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party, or independents, I mean, don't register. And obviously, Ross, you have to go back probably to Ross Perot to see a candidate that really registered. So we are in a different situation. You mentioned about Le Pen, and you had a lot of competitions where it was three parties that were fairly equally matched. And what happened when you've Le Pen as number one, then you've the two and the three. The two and the three came together and had a conversation, and one of them pulled out. So it was 1-1, and therefore the strength of the votes for the second and third parties were aligned and defeated Le Pen. And that's how they kept her out, despite the fact. And again, the media don't talk about this. Marine Le Pen won the most seats. She won the highest vote share. She was the most successful party, but because other parties come together, and because in Europe in a PR system that you've got those alliances of different parties coming together and all coming up with an unholy alliance that they may hate each other, but they will come together because the evil party on the right that wants freedom of speech, we must stop that at all costs. And that's what happened in France. We haven't seen it as strongly in other parts of Europe. In Germany, it was the media tried to decimate the AfD, and of course the government tried to designate them a terrorist organization. That was the issue there. And then in other countries, there are other battles, but it's France and Germany. Those are the two huge countries that define Europe. It's that Franco-German alliance. And the Brits were always on the edge, unwanted citizens of the European Union. They've now been ditched, so it goes back. And into that is a weak President Macron in France, the French leader. And I actually don't know who the new leader of Germany is because no one cares. So you've got weak leaderships in there. You've got populist parties right there on the door. And of course, they've tried to ban Marine Le Pen from running for 5 years because of financial impropriety. And I don't know the rights and wrongs of that. I don't know whether she did siphon money off to the local or the national campaigns away from the European. There are strict rules around that. But what I do know is that's how the system works. You take the money and you spend it as you like. It's like a gold mine. You go there, you grab, and you do whatever you want because there's so little restrictions, so little balances. So, if Marine Le Pen did do that, and if she's guilty of what she's been charged, it's actually what's been done across the board. And maybe we should see every leader of every European country stopped from running, and we should have elections in every country. But of course, this is not a level playing field. This is against the parties on the right that speak common sense and are concerned about that that creeping control, it's not creeping anymore, overwhelming control of that central European Union machine. And that destroys the integrity of individual countries. And we've seen that across the board. So, yeah, whether or not she's guilty, I don't, but let's have a level playing field, and that happens. So the only thing she's maybe guilty of is maybe foolishness for not knowing how to play the system. That to me is what she's been guilty of. But any excuse, any reason they can find to ban someone hugely popular as Marine Le Pen, they will use. And you need to be aware of that, and you need to be cleaner than clean.
It's supremely disproportionate to the quote crime. 5 years of prison, which is being knocked down to 2 of house arrest or something ridiculous like that, gigantic fines. And then the key, of course, is being banned from running. So it is the ultimate disenfranchising of the French voter, that you don't get to vote for the person you want to vote for. You simply don't get to do it. It's breathtaking from where we sit over here. Again, they tried to do that to President Trump, to candidate Trump, and were unable to. So it's these extreme forms of ensuring that the party they don't like, or the positions they don't like, and the ideologies that they don't like, don't have a chance. And what are those parties and positions? It's protecting your national culture, shutting the borders from Muslim and other invaders who completely shatter your culture. It's so peculiar to me about France in particular, because when I was growing up, I studied French. I was at a French school, and France was extremely protective of its culture. Extremely. You couldn't say the word weekend, le weekend. You were not allowed to say that. Extremely protective of everything. Movies coming in, they were very protective against American silly movies, and they wanted to protect French cultural cinema and all of this. And we knew that they really treasured what they had. They valued it, they loved it, they treasured it in every way, protected it. And now to watch that protectiveness so completely thrown away is it's a stunning thing to see. To having again, mosques and in cathedrals, having Muslim celebrations happening, having streets shut down. In every way, the French culture is being undermined. And yet, let's just get back to free speech here. You're not allowed to say those things. Not in France, not in Germany, certainly not in the UK. You're not allowed to protect your culture. You're not allowed to speak the truth. You're not allowed to say talk about the various threats. You're not allowed to say any of those things that we're talking about. So is speech the main weapon that the people have against these incursions? Or how do you see free speech in this whole battle?
Well, it's interesting when France, I think when President Trump was asked, and he responded, it's awful what's happened to Marine Le Pen, where actually she's been banned from running. It sounds very much like America, doesn't it? And it's a beautiful line. And and then he moved on from that. But I think it's great when President Trump realized that actually that was the attack on democracy in the US, and still is the attack on democracy in the US in many of the states that still hold the power of how you vote, which again is an alien concept to most European countries, where we have a European voting, a countrywide voting system. In America, you've got only a stateside voting system. And if the person in charge of the levers of power in that state is nefarious, then you don't have a proper election. And we've seen that divide across the US. So, yeah, it's the whole issue of freedom of speech. We've seen France decimate. And again, this goes back to whenever you have a vacuum, into that vacuum goes something. It does not remain a vacuum. And the sad thing about France is it's abandoned any Christian ideology, any Christian element hundreds of years ago. It's a secular nation. Something must come into that, and maybe Frenchness A baguette has actually held off that for a long time. A baguette against an Islamic ideology isn't much of a match, and that's what France are finding. With the UK, we've had that restriction more so, but you look at Sweden. Again, Sweden has abandoned its Christian roots a long time ago, and Sweden has utterly collapsed, and it's collapsed because Islam has gone into that, and women having zero rights, non-Muslims having zero rights, and you've got utter gang warfare in Sweden. So Sweden is completely gone; it's finished. Then you look at France, and you've got the running battles in Paris that have happened for the last 6, 7, 8 years and still happen because of lack of integration. You look down in Marseille, the armpit of France, and Marseille, and I've been to Marseille numerous times, 5, 6 times, and the nice areas are the very few areas. It is now mass immigration from Africa and the Middle East, and people come in with a different understanding of what freedoms mean. Freedom in Islam means freedom to practice Islam. It doesn't mean freedom to disagree. It doesn't mean freedom to critique. It doesn't mean freedom to walk away. It means freedom to accept that, and that's it. That is not freedom. That is a totalitarian system that is enforcing a thought on someone. And that's what we're seeing in France, and we're seeing it spread into the UK. And the weird thing is, as part of that free speech, which is separate maybe from what you asked about in terms of the conversation online and social media, but if you look at offline conversation, then you've got Brussels is 35% Muslim. Brussels is completely gone. You think the European Union, you think actually that's where the European Parliament is, which I've been to many times. The European Parliament area is a beautiful area. You go into the suburbs and it is a S-hole. It really is. And you would never, ever want to be there because the country is being destroyed. That's what's happening with France. That is slowly what's happening in the UK. That is London is 12% Muslim, but the issue is that if you do not have a strong identity, into that vacuum goes anything else. And Islam is the dominant force. It is the aggressive religious ideology, and it is pushing its way into that. And in the UK, we have the rise of Sharia courts. No one knows how many. 85 is a number of Sharia courts that are allowed to operate in a quasi-legal way, separate from an English legal system. Then you've got halal food. You go down to my local high street in London and it's all halal food. It's difficult if you go into your KFC or if you go into your Pizza Hut or if you go into many of the takeaways, halal is on the outside. You don't have a choice. And of course, you've got women covered head to foot. You've got the mosques there. And I remember the first time it hit me was up in the north of England in Bradford, that is in Yorkshire, traditional English city. And I remember going up there 15 years ago and I was blown away because instead of a church on every street corner, it's a mosque on every street corner. And into that, you've got a progressive elite that don't want to offend. And that means they submit themselves to the ideology that's most vocal and that's most aggressive, and that is Islam. And that is why the online safety bill in Britain, that supposedly was about child safety, but actually is about don't say anything that may cause offence to someone else. If you do, you're liable to punishment. The Digital Services Act in Europe, Australia have pushed back on that, and I mentioned that when I was with you in Milwaukee at that great event you organised, Karen. You always organise great events, but at that great event in August, September time, and that morning the Australian government had just pushed back on a similar bill in the Parliament. But this thing will come, it'll be pushed by entities in the US. And the hope is that President Trump understands that and pushes back against that. But government is a huge machine. And President Trump has got a lot on his plate. And I just hope that he learns from what is happening in Europe at that curtailing of free speech. And I hope you learn from it and actually are aware of that and put protections in place to protect um, not only the First but the Second Amendment.
Well, right. The second protects the first. But so we do have the First Amendment and the second that protects it, the right to free speech. But and as you just said, so many of these bills that are massive restrictions on free speech, they are wrapped in some kind of compassionate looking thing, a protection. You're protecting the children. Here it sort of started as hate speech, right? You can't do hate speech. So once you open the door to that, it's the classic slippery slope, because hateful to whom, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we know this was on the back of what was a Shepherd, Matthew Shepard, who was a gay kid who was assaulted, and then there was issues of hate speech arose from that, and a hate speech all sort of tumbled in together. And it turns out he wasn't assaulted because he was gay in the slightest. It was a drug deal gone bad. The reality never really matters as long as you can build something that is to your liking if you're on the left. So curtailing speech, that's one of the slopes. You can't say this kind of thing, that kind of thing, because you might offend. This is offensive. And one of the things that we saw here in the last 4 years, it's over now, misgendering someone. And people have suffered mightily for using the wrong pronoun. In schools, people have lost jobs, people have been debanked, right? So that's part of the just the complete nonsense of being forced to say a thing that you know is not true. And as you pointed out before, and I wanted to bring this up, to what extent is our turning our back on Christian roots, on biblical roots, on our Judeo-Christian Western civilization roots? We've cast those aside. To what extent is all of this, is it following that, as you mentioned, Frenchness, Englishness, but also Christian, a Christian set of core beliefs? Not only are they core beliefs, but they're massively held by the majority of the population. You've thrown all that aside. The very notion of Englishness, of Christianity, and of being free to act in accordance with your beliefs. The Muslims are completely applauded with acting in accordance with theirs, having Sharia courts, forcing women to be covered, and now girls should be covered because they might get attacked otherwise. The Muslims are allowed to act in accordance with their beliefs, which, by the way, include, it's a mandate to convert people you live among, convert everybody you come in contact with to Islam. So they're allowed to do that, and yet Christians are not. How do you, are all these somehow related? Is the loss of culture also a loss of a confidence in your roots and in faith?
Let me go through the 20 thoughts in my mind and think how I put that forward. One, you've got a walking away Christian values in Europe. And we've talked about that. Why is that important? And when I say Christian, I mean Christian Judeo principles, because without Jesus, without the New Testament, you would not have the Old Testament, and the promise was given by God to Abraham and his generations. And you see the line of God rescuing humanity from itself, all the way from Adam, all the way through in the New Testament into Jesus, and all the way into the early church. So those are completely aligned, and this this discussion on Christian nationalism, which I 100% agree with, that does not negate or remove any of the foundational absolute importance of Judaism, because again, without one, you do not, without Judaism, you do not have Christianity. So, and remember that Jesus, I just want to put it because, again, you've got a weird element in some Christian understanding. The church has replaced the promises that God made to the Jewish people. I don't read that in my Bible at all. It is the promise that goes through the whole of the Bible. And Jesus taught in the synagogues, and we have many references in the Gospels where he went and preached in the synagogues, and that's where he went as a Jew. And as a young man, he went through that. He was circumcised. He grew up in that culture. So, to that as part of my answer. That aside, um, again, the Bible teaches a lot of these values that we have an era of subjective truth that means there is no truth. And whenever you move off objective truth, because it's a fear of what is objective truth, what is absolutes, and the absolutes are actually given in Scripture. And you go back to we are all made in the image of God. Everyone has value. That then should destroy Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry that says, actually, if you're small, you don't have value. Or if you're in the mother's womb and haven't been born, you don't have value. And that goes to the whole issue of racism. Everyone has value, irrespective of the color of your skin, irrespective of any of your cultural background, that you have the same value because you're made in the image of God. So that would actually fix a lot of the problems we have in the world in terms of hatred of skin color and in terms of the global abortion industry. And then God made Adam and Eve male and female. It's quite simple. There's one gender and then there's another, male and female. They are different, but actually come together and complement each other and are absolutely equal in that. That would change the understanding that you can have however many genders you want over breakfast cereal. That is nonsense. And again, it is this moving away from those principles that are in the Bible. That's why we've got ourselves in such a mess in society. And the church, we see in the UK, the Church of England have embraced this ideology of confusion, ideology of uncertainty, ideology of your truth and my truth, and moved away from no, there is an absolute truth. And that's what defines society. And if you move away from that, you will have utter chaos in society and your society will collapse. And that's what we will see. And that's, again, I go back and I will always connect, talking to you, Karen, and US audience, connect why it matters to the US. And it matters because you still have a church that is strong and
Yes.
knows what it believes. It is in those waves of confusion, yes, but I have, when I travel all over the world, it is only in Latin America and North America that I've seen a church that is confident about what it believes, confident about what it preaches, and encourages its congregation to go and do likewise, live out your faith. In Europe, that is not the case. You have a Bible story, and then you can do what you like the rest of the week. And with it is not only President Trump taking his position as president, it is also that thing gives, I think, the ability for the church to rise up and speak truth in the society in a way that maybe they've been battered down continuously before. Suddenly they have the impetus, they have the authority, and they have the right to speak into society. And where in the UK we've seen the church sidelined and removed from culture, from that public square. In the US, that is not the same. In the US, I've been so intrigued visiting churches, and they tell people how to vote. They say, well, if your candidate does this, 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 you vote this, this, this. In the UK, it's fear of the Charity Commission. You cannot say that because you might get your charitable status taken away. You have a boldness in America that we need to learn from Europe. So that's my long answer to a free speech question that you asked a long time ago, Karen.
Well, it really is. It's absolutely fascinating hearing you refer to our churches as being, politically active, because up until not that long ago, they absolutely, on the right, were not. On the left, absolutely. Because the left has permeated absolutely every institution. Every single one. The Long March deliberately, has gone through them, including the churches. So one hears sermons that reject Christianity in a Christian church. This is absolutely the way it is. And we talk about all the churches have gone woke. Every now and then you'll find one that isn't, but for the most part they are. And it's anti-Christian. I wouldn't say it's atheistic, but it's certainly nothing along the it's woke. It's the religion of wokeism. It's the religion of leftism. It's the religion of, in a large sense, nihilism, but it's certainly not the religion of the Bible. And I also want to add, you had said that these things are separate. I remember Hillary Clinton at one point saying, yes, our First Amendment guarantees you the right to worship as you want. No, no, it's not just about what you do on Sundays. It's not just about what church you go to or don't go to. It is the right to practice your religion in accordance with its tenets. And that is what, in large part, we have been losing. You have been losing. Germany has turned its back. France has turned it back to live in accordance with a Christian set of beliefs or Judaic set of beliefs. And you were just talking about that all of that is flushed out. And yet the only religion that's allowed, the only religious adherents that are allowed to live according to their religious beliefs are the Muslims. And we're seeing that here, and we see that in Europe. But what scares me here is when kids learn about their First Amendment rights, they don't learn the actual text of it. They learn it, whatever you do on Sunday is okay. And they learn about this wall between church and state that's somehow codified, but it is not. So a lot of this is education, and a lot of it's free speech. But you're seeing this in the UK, people who act in accordance with their beliefs, including speech. In particular, there was just a case that came up that I know we're out of time, but I'm fascinated by this. This woman, Livia Tosici Bolt, who has held a sign in front of an abortion clinic, here to talk if you want. That's what her sign said, but it was in a restricted area, and she's convicted. She's convicted of a speech crime, a hate crime, of making people uncomfortable. What's going on with that, Peter?
So we have, and it's really interesting because the US have connected this to the trade issue, which is another issue which we'll not get into that chaos. So, onto the cultural side, um, she held up a sign saying, "Here to talk," and that was within 500 feet of an abortion clinic, and anything you do that may curtail the happening within an abortion clinic is illegal. So if you hold up a sign and offer to pray for someone within 500 feet, if you're praying silently within 500 feet, that is also illegal. And we've had a number of people arrested and charged for illegally praying. So it goes past the latest case of holding up the sign and offering to talk to people, because I get the huge concern is, and you'll know this on Planned Parenthood, that when people, women who are in that situation, they're maybe confused, they don't know what to do, maybe they don't want to talk to their family, and they go to an abortion provider. And of course, what does the abortion provider say? Have an abortion, because that is where the money comes for their industry. There is no kind of middle medium where women can go and have an open conversation to say, what are the options? The drive is to abortion. It's not towards adoption. It's not towards let's engage with your local church. Let's see what can be done. And they're pushed down a path. It's not all the women are young and confused. It may be those who actually it's a lifestyle choice, but again, it's this conversation. What actually are the options? I think it's all about options, and all the options should be presented with some before you make a decision, and that's not happening. But in the UK, it is illegal, passed by a conservative government. A conservative government in the UK, that it is illegal to do anything within 500 feet of one of our hundreds of abortion clinics that may stop that process happening, and that is including offering to talk to people, and that is including that is including praying silently. And I remember talking to a Church of England vicar, and he said we were discussing this, and I said I gave him a whole page of bullet points of prayer items that the church could engage with on this, um, and his response was, "You're one of those American religious right wing people, aren't you? You'd be shouting at those women." I said, how did you come to that conclusion? I just want to have options on the table. And I think that anyone who goes in there for initial conversation should actually have those options on the table and not be pushed down a path. So that is my line. And I love that President Trump, not as a pro-life president, really, but actually, he has given that back to the state, because it is not in your constitution that actually the state have the right to take life in that way. So therefore, it goes back to the state. And that's a common sense approach. That is legally the approach to use. And then I would love to actually go further and actually engage with those states and say, actually, let's not rush down this line of carrying out abortions. Let's pull back. So that's on the free speech side. And on the abortion side, I would say I love the argument or the discussion about the heartbeat legislation, because what defines life? If you went to someone in an accident, you put their finger on their wrist, you check their pulse. If there is a beat, a heartbeat, they're alive. If there's not a beat, they're dead. That's what we use for adults. Why should we not use the same for children? And if there is a beat, if the heart is beating, therefore they're alive. And that is at 6, 7, 8 weeks. And I think that should be a conversation to have. But yeah, we would never have that in Europe, but you in the US can have that conversation.
We can, and the Supreme Court making that decision, sending it back to the states, just threw everything into a utter frenzy. But one of my favorite reactions to it was, who said nine? It was men originally, and 9 people in robes can decide, what I do with my body. And the reaction was, that's exactly the point. It was Roe v. Wade that those men at the time did decide what you. So stop it. It is a state issue, and it was an outrageous act of Roe v. Wade those decades ago. It should never have been that. And you're absolutely right. It should be a conversation. And it became one now with that decision here, and it can't there. So what this case with this woman, it's really where free speech and freedom of religion and the rejection of both of those things are at a head, along with the preciousness of human life, all in one go, and an overzealous woke government to prosecute. She's in her 60s for standing there saying, let's just talk. It's a horror watching this. We've seen it here also. So I think, is there, before I go to the books thing, because I'm going to ask you for book recommendations, quick words of advice to America, given what we're seeing you guys go through.
It's just you need to hold on, and you do intrinsically in the American understanding. You hold on to actually freedom of thought and freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and that's inbuilt to the American dream, and that is vital. It is only those freedoms that allow individuals to flourish and are the bedrock of society in terms of the business side, in terms of the economy side, but also in terms of those social groupings. So it is utterly vital. And do not go down the avenue of restricting free speech because someone somewhere may be offended, because someone somewhere will always be offended. And if that's your line, then you're going to ban Teslas because obviously they offend a lot of people recently.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, we will pay close attention. And as AFA, that is exactly what we do. We stand up for these things and try to ensure they're not lost. Do you have books you can recommend to us, either that had an impact on you or that you think we should all read?
Well, I grew up in you kind of the more and more interviews you do, you read a lot of people's books, and you also read less books because the whole social media, current affairs is a treadmill, and you get out of that habit. I grew up on C.S. Lewis Narnia, and I remember reading all Narnia books from The Magician's Nephew through The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe to The Last Battle, all seven of them, five, six times. I remember at night with a torch reading it under my covers in the middle of the night. And that's what I love. And C.S. Lewis, I didn't realize the time, born in Belfast, so back in my home country, and someone who used use stories to speak truth. So to me, the Narnia series have always been those seven books, and much wider. C.S. Lewis wrote prolifically, and was recognized. I think was chair of English in Oxford, Cambridge, one of those two. So yes, but C.S. Lewis absolutely. On the specific Christian side, A.W. Tozer has always been one of my. The Knowledge of the Holy, I think, is one of the most phenomenal books written, and it is takes the characteristics of God, and maybe 30, 40 chapters, and each one is maybe 3 pages, and he looks at the fundamentals of who God is, the characteristics of God, and opens that up in a book that's 120 pages. I mean, literally, it's a thin book, and is the most packed book. And I remember reading that as a teenager, and to me, that has stayed with me, because if you understand who God is, then you will understand the world He has created, and you will know how you engage in it. So, to me, those are the two books and series and authors that I've grown up with. Uh, Recently, so many, and I look over at my bookshelf. It's like, where do I go? Um, I think whenever I start engaging on Islam, the person that really I went to was Robert Spencer, and I know Robert Spencer, a good friend of AFA. I had the awesome privilege of actually meeting him for the first time. He's been a guest on Heart Folk many times, but meeting him at that Milwaukee event, that AFA event in August, September time. And it was an honor to actually meet him at long last. He's written the Palestinian Myth, I think, is one that we did recently. His books on Muhammad and who Muhammad is. Probably could say the Muhammad myth. That's another, but all of that and series and range of books on engaging Islam and understanding what Islam is and speaking truth into that, which often the media give us a different perspective. So yeah, recently it's been Robert Spencer, and if you want to understand Islam and its position in the world, then Robert Spencer really needs to be your go-to author for understanding his huge range of books on the life of Muhammad, the spread of Islam, and then those ideas that come from Islam, the Palestinian state, that one of them, and you delve into those, and they're so easy to read. You sometimes people give you books, and as a trudge, it is so I push it uphill the whole way. With Robert Spencer, they're easy to read. So to me, actually, that's the author, I think, who's been my go-to for really understanding Islam as the ideology and what it really teaches.
Well, that is three great recommendations, and I will pass on what you say to Robert. We are, of course, honoring him September 6th when we're honoring Steve Bannon as our Hero of Conscience honoree. Robert Spencer is our American Freedom Award winner, and also Dr. John Eastman with our new Hineni Award, harking to Judeo-Christian roots. Here I am, Lord, is the intent of that, and John Eastman has been that. Robert Spencer is unbelievably prolific. Just during the time when one introduces him, he's written another 3 books. He's is really something, and his writing style is very easy to read, as is his speaking style, and he's charming and funny. I hope you're able to come to that Peter.
And tickets are available, I'm sure, Karen.
Tickets, yes, thank you. Go to our website, AmericanFreedomAlliance.org. Tickets are available, and we're selling them actually like hotcakes. People are buying up entire tables, which is just completely terrific. So nothing like honoring really good, brave, courageous people, and that's what we're doing. And Peter, thank you so much. It was a real delight talking to you. Let's do this again sometime.
We should. Always good catching up with you, Karen, and this time we filmed it.
Yeah,
So
this time
always
we
good.
filmed
Thank you so much.
it. It's very true. Thank you.